Hey guys, tonight we begin our descent into the powerful and visually overwhelming world of Timurid Samarkand, circa 1410 CE, a city striving to be the greatest jewel of the known world. What happens inside a city that wakes before its people? Historians still debate whether this magnificent capital was primarily funded by the vast spoils of war and plunder, or by the genuinely innovative and peaceful trade it conducted along the Silk Road. This contradiction, built by conquest, sustained by commerces woven into every tile and tapestry. We will move slowly, allowing the sensory world to unfold and pull you gently into sleep. We will feel the texture of rough wool and smell the lingering smoke of dung fires. This is an era of uncompromising cold, questionable hygiene, and laws enforced with terrifying immediacy. Be honest, without modern medicine, most of us wouldn't last 6 months before succumbing to dysentery or a rogue fever. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I truly appreciate that connection. The artisan's cold awakening. The pre-dawn cold in Samarkand is not merely low temperature. It is a heavy, damp, penetrating force that seems to seep through the thickest adobe walls. Inside a small house pressed against the soaring walls of the soon-to-be finished Registan Square, the first sound of the day is a low bronchial cough. Yunus, the young apprentice silk dyer, stirs. He lies on a thin felted mat, the weight of the rough wool blanket offering more presence than warmth. His first motion is to reach for his quilted, cotton cala robe. The robe is heavy, smelling faintly of old dye residue and the perpetual dampness of Central Asian winter. He places his bare feet onto the beaten earth floor. The ground is ice, a small, unexpected observation for a city defined by its vibrant blue and green tiles. The color palette inside the average home is limited almost entirely to browns, grays, and the deep, faded blue of old indigo. The small, clay oven in the center of the room is lifeless. Yunus retrieves the fuel-tightly packed briquettes of dried animal dung, known as ki. He strikes a flint. Sparks catch the tinder, and immediately a thick, acrid cloud of smoke fills the room. It is a necessary evil. The smoke stings the eyes and throat, but it is the herald of heat. The smoke slowly finds the ventilation hole in the roof, carrying with it the ghost of last night's meal. Yunus steps into the tiny and closed courtyard. His wife, Fatima, is already there, having quietly risen before him. She carries a heavy clay water jar. The water inside is drawn from the Canot system, and is so cold it makes the jar feel like a stone pulled from a frozen river. This is a widely accepted historical fact. The elaborate underground water channels, the Canots, required staggering communal effort to maintain, making water retrieval the day's first and most crucial task. Fatima begins preparing the dough for naan bread. Her hands sink into the dense, cool mass of flour and water. The rhythm is steady, a soft thump-thump, as she works the dough against a wooden board. She shapes the bread into flat rounds, pressing a wooden stamped checkage into the center for decoration and to allow the bread to bake evenly. The subtle contradiction: even the simplest food is treated as an artistic endeavor in this culture. Yunus, meanwhile, prepares his materials. He trades in fine, but not elite, silk threads destined for embroidery. He unwraps a small bundle of yarn. The silk is delicate, slippery, and cool to the touch. It smells of the alum used as a mordant and the faint sweetness of pomegranate husks, which he sometimes uses for a dull yellow dye. He checks his small bronze weight, used for measuring threads. The unresolved question historians still debate, given the vast distances the silk traveled and the number of middlemen. How was the purity and standardization of silk thread weight and quality consistently enforced across the sprawling Timurid Empire? Was it the iron fist of the state or the self-interest of powerful merchant guilds that kept the system honest? Yunus's small weight is a tangible, yet silent, piece of this enormous economic puzzle. Outside the house, the city is starting its mechanical waking. A low-pitched scraping sound echoes from a nearby alley. It is the sound of someone sweeping dust and last night's detritus out of their doorway, a quiet joke about absurdity. Every morning, everyone sweeps their mess into the street, transforming a community problem into a neighborhood one. This is the Timurid solution to urban waste management. A voice sounds, the low, almost musical cry of the water seller, even though the sun has not yet risen. He walks with a yoke across his shoulders, carrying water from a cleaner, farther well. He charges a premium, which Yunus and Fatima usually cannot afford. Fatima slides the bread rounds onto a thin wooden peel, ready for the tandir. The oven is finally hot, its clay walls radiating scorching heat. Soon, the penetrating aroma of baking bread will cover the unpleasantness of the morning smoke and the street smells. That brief, perfect smell of fresh naan is the only guaranteed luxury in their day. The potter's unbroken rhythm. The sun is finally clearing the horizon, casting the minarets in a brilliant, almost painful gold, contrasting sharply with the long, indigo shadows that still hug the streets. Yunus bundles up his silk threads, tucking them securely inside his robe for protection against dust and thieves. He makes his way toward the great bazaar, navigating the widening stream of people. The streets are now alive with noise, though it is a low, shuffling noise, the sound of hundreds of worn leather boots and bare feet on hard earth. The air thickens with the smell of wet wool, donkey breath, and the faint, sweet scent of dried dates being unpacked by a small vendor. He passes a potter's shop, its door slightly ajar. Inside, the potter, a man named Rustam, is already at work. He sits at his wheel in a dim, dusty corner. A small, unexpected observation. Rustam does not use a treadle wheel, which requires foot power, but a simple, ancient hand wheel. He must constantly squat and use his hand or a stick to maintain momentum, a tedious and back-breaking process. Rustam is throwing a set of bowls destined for a wealthy merchant's house. They are to be deep, stable, and glazed in a rich lapis lazuli color. The rhythmic swish of the clay spinning is hypnotic. The wet clay rises obediently between his fingers, transformed from an inert lump into a precise, delicate vessel. Yunus pauses to watch. There is a deep, sensual pleasure in watching skilled labor. Rustam's hands are thick, but they move with impossible grace, pulling the clay up into a flawless cylinder, then shaping the belly with the gentle pressure of his thumb. This is a widely accepted historical fact. Samarkand's distinctive, deep blue and turquoise glazed ceramics were internationally renowned, using cobalt oxide mined and imported from as far away as Persia. The potter's shop itself smells entirely of damp, cool earth and wood smoke from the nearby kiln. Dust a fine, grey film of dried clay covers everything. The shelves, the tools, Rustam's heavy eyebrows. He seems to exist in a permanent, beige cloud. Rustam coughs, a short, deep bark, and spits a mouthful of tobacco residue onto the floor near his wheel. A quiet joke about discomfort. The life of a master artisan often involves inhaling his own materials for decades, ensuring his lungs are as coated with clay as his walls. Yunus moves on, knowing he cannot afford the delay. He reaches a junction where the street widens into a small, open square, dominated by a large open-air water reservoir. The water is drawn from the Connaught system, but here, it stands still. It looks opaque and slightly green. People wash their faces and fill jars here. The subtle contradiction. The hawse is a vital source of life and a necessary meeting point, but it is also a stagnant breeding ground for every disease known to the city, which no one seems to acknowledge as they drink from it. He sees two older men arguing near the hawse. They are merchants haggling over the price of hides. Their voices are loud and clipped, full of exaggerated offense and dramatic gestures. This is the background music of the Samarkand economy. Yunus finally reaches the massive, arched entrance of the main bazaar. The doors are already thrown open, revealing a cavernous, dimly lit tunnel where the light struggles to penetrate the layers of dust and canvas awnings. The unresolved question historians still debate: To what extent did Timurid rulers use public works and architecture, like the magnificent halls and the monumental gates, specifically to control the population and project an image of overwhelming divinely sanctioned power rather than for simple utility? The grand scale certainly seems intended to dwarf the average citizen. As Yunus passes the threshold, the world of quiet morning ritual gives way to the bustling energy of commerce. He feels the density of the crowd increase immediately. He adjusts his kala, making sure the silver coins he earned yesterday, a few meager tangar, safely secured deep within an inner pocket. A lesser-known detail, because the value of currency was often fluctuating based on the whim of the current ruler or the latest conquest. It was common for merchants to hide their savings not just in coins, but in easily convertible, non-perishable goods like spices, gems, or even high-quality saffron hidden in jars. He must find the spice sellers first. His blue silk threads are intended to be sold to a Persian embroidery house that specializes in robes decorated with floral patterns, and he needs to find them quickly before the best spots in the crowded aisle are taken. The goal is simple, but the journey is tedious. Navigate the smells, avoid the donkeys, and don't make eye contact with the tax collectors, who always seem to be the most awake people in the city. The mystery of the Registan. Yunus pushes his way deeper into the market area that abuts the Registan. Even before the Grand Square achieved its full, monumental glory, this area was the undeniable heart of the city's commerce. The noise here is a dense, high-frequency hum, voices, the ringing of a faraway bell, and the insistent buzz of flies drawn by the open baskets of food. He skirts the edge of the large open space. Registan, meaning sandy place, still lives up to its name. Despite the elaborate stone paving that is currently underway near the grand architectural projects, dust, fine and yellowish gray, coats everything, constantly stirred up by feet and hooves. The major historical hook that defines this moment is the contradiction we feel here. Yunus is walking across what will soon become the world's most prestigious Islamic university complex, yet right now, it functions entirely as a chaotic, lucrative commercial center. This is a widely accepted historical fact. The area we now know as Registan was originally lined with merchant stalls, bathhouses, and caravanserais, and the first major madrasa school was only just completed by Ullah Beg, shifting the square's identity from purely commercial to intellectual and spiritual. Yunus finds his spot near the eastern arcade, settling his bundle down next to a quiet, older man who sells medicinal herbs. The scent of dried mint, fennel, and something sharply acidic, perhaps sumac, is a welcome change from the street smells. The sun, now higher, illuminates the colossal facade of the newly constructed Ola Begmad. It dominates the square, a sheer wall of intricate mosaics and calligraphic patterns. The colors, luminous turquoise, deep cobalt, and black, seem impossibly rich, built to outlast human memory. A small donkey train trots past, carrying bricks for the continuing construction. The bricks are rough and unfired, and the donkey handler curses under his breath as the heavy load shifts. A subtle micro-hook, the exquisite beauty of Samarkand's architecture, stands in stark contrast to the brutal, monotonous labor required to build it, a dichotomy easily ignored by the elite. Yunus opens his bundle, carefully displaying a few hanks of the deep blue silk thread. He waits. Silence is also a tool of the trade. A tax inspector, distinguishable by his meticulously clean, slightly too short tunic and his stern expression, approaches. He carries a small wooden tablet and a reed pen. He stops by the old herb seller first, examining his wares with a look of suspicion, a quiet joke about authority. The tax collector possesses the singular, uncomfortable skill of making everyone feel instantly guilty, even those selling dried weeds for stomach ailments. The tax inspector notes down the herb seller's identity and demands the daily tribute, a small, fixed sum of copper pool. The old man sighs dramatically, counting out the coins with painstaking slowness, hoping to discourage the official with boredom. As the inspector moves toward Yunus, a commotion erupts near the center of the square. A small group of mullahs, religious scholars, is attempting to set up a platform for a public reading of a religious text. Their robes are pristine white, and their movements are deliberately slow and dignified, clearly aiming to look superior to the mercantile chaos around them. The contradiction, the spiritual purity they represent, must fight for space with the raw, loud, overwhelming demand of the market. The unresolved question historians still debate was the transition of the Registan from a bazaar to an intellectual center, a smooth, planned transformation driven by Ulugh Beg's scholarship, or was it a gradual, politically fraught process that required the forced displacement of powerful, wealthy merchants who preferred the profits of the bazaar to the piety of the academy? Yunus quickly covers his threads. He does not want the official attention drawn his way, especially as the mullahs draw a small, curious crowd. He makes a small offering of a dried apricot to the herb seller, a gesture of solidarity. A woman in a heavy veil stops by his stall. She is followed by a young female slave carrying a large, empty basket. The woman does not speak, but gestures toward the silk. She touches the thread, feeling its coolness and its texture. She is interested in the density of the blue color, a lesser-known detail, because the dye was extracted from the indigo plant through a complex fermentation process. The color often varied slightly from batch to batch, and wealthy clients could distinguish the best, deepest indigo simply by feel and subtle scent. Yunus quotes his price, slightly higher than usual. The woman's eyes, visible above her veil, narrow slightly. The negotiation begins in silence, through subtle hand signals visible only to the slave and Yunus, and soft, almost whispered character offers. The slow, intense focus required for this exchange creates a temporary bubble of stillness amid the surrounding din of the marketplace, a scholar's quiet morning, while the commercial frenzy churns in the Registan, a short walk away. The atmosphere inside the newly finished Ulugh Beg Madrasa is one of profound hushed order. Here, the pervasive scent of dust and spices is replaced by the smell of parchment, dried ink, and cold stone. A young student, 20-year-old Mansour, sits in his small single-room hudra cell, which opens onto the grand inner courtyard. The room is tiny, built entirely of stone, and still retains the morning chill. The only decoration is the intricate, geometric tilework on the exterior arch, a constant reminder of the high artistic ideals of the academy. Mansour is engaged in the demanding art of Naskh calligraphy. His tools are simple: a reed pen kalam, a small, heavy inkwell made of polished brass, and a block of pale yellow paper imported at great expense from China. He is copying a treatise on geometry. His work requires intense focus. The kalam must be cut precisely, and the ink a mixture of soot, gum, Arabic, and water must flow perfectly. He is hunched over his low writing desk, his posture rigid. The demanding physical detail, maintaining the perfect thickness and shape of the stroke, requires Mansour to hold his breath repeatedly, a small, involuntary ritual of scholarship. He completes a challenging letter, the sweeping, dramatic curve of the Arabic nuun, and exhales softly. He leans back, momentarily relieved, and rubs the stiffness from his neck. A quiet joke about the absurdity of dedication. These scholars spend years perfecting the presentation of knowledge, even though the content itself, drawn from ancient Greek or Persian sources, has been copied flawlessly thousands of times before. The style, not the novelty, is the point. Mansour looks up at the small, high window. The light entering his room is indirect, filtered through the thick stone walls. He is grateful for the quiet. Outside in the main courtyard, the occasional sound of a door closing or a pair of students whispering is amplified by the hard tiled surfaces. This is a widely accepted historical fact. Ulugh Beg, the grandson of Timur who founded this madrasa, was an intellectual and astronomer of international repute. Under his patronage, Samarkand became an unprecedented center for mathematical and astronomical learning, merging religious study with secular science. He dips his kalam back into the brass inkwell. The ink smells slightly metallic and sweet. He must be careful not to dip too deep, which would blot the precious paper. Paper, despite its availability, is still a significant investment. His hujra lacks a fireplace, relying entirely on the residual heat of the afternoon sun and the warmth of his small charcoal brazier. The brazier is currently cold. Mansoor pulls his heavy wool blanket closer around his shoulders, feeling the rough texture against his cheek. The unresolved question historians still debate: to what extent did the scientific curriculum championed by Ulugh Beg truly penetrate the wider madrasa student body, or was it primarily confined to a few elite scholars like Ali Kushji? Was the grand educational project an actual movement towards scientific renaissance, or mainly a political display to rival the intellectual centers of Cairo and Baghdad? Mansour begins the next line. He copies a phrase that mentions the precise calculation of a star's position. The text is dense, and he reads it aloud in a low, monotone murmur, a common practice to aid memorization. A vendor passes the madrasa gates, shouting the price of roasted pistachios. The sound is muffled but distinct, a sensory contrast microhook. The lofty, quiet pursuit of celestial mathematics is momentarily interrupted by the utterly mundane, delicious reality of street food. Mansour ignores it. He focuses on the slight imperfection in the paper, a faint watermark that he must write around. He presses the reed pen down, controlling the precise slant and width of the letter Aleph. His life right now is measured not in days or months, but in the perfect flow of ink onto paper. His small meal for the morning sits on a shelf, a piece of leftover hard bread, slightly stale, and a handful of dried grapes. He will eat that at noon, quickly, before returning to his studies. A lesser-known detail: madrasa students were often fed simple but adequate communal meals funded by WAQF, religious endowments, but many still relied on supplementary food or income, often copying books for wealthy patrons. He hears the distant, rhythmic clang of a coppersmith, beginning his heavy worker sound that will only grow louder as the morning progresses. Mansour sighs, a sound of gentle resignation. He knows that the noise of the physical world will soon make this quiet focus impossible, but for now, he has this perfect, cold, ink-scented silence. Water rituals and the Qanot. Mansour's studies are about to be interrupted by the universal, urgent need for clean water. He gathers his brass ewer and proceeds to the courtyard. The stone paving here is cool, polished by generations of feet, and damp from the residual night moisture. He is heading not for the polluted halls in the main bazaar, but to a designated well within the madrasa compound, reserved specifically for the students and the esteemed teachers. This small privilege subtly underscores the higher status of the scholarly class. As he approaches the wellhead, the structure reveals itself to be less of a simple pit and more of a complex, stone-lined aperture. The rope used to draw the water is thick, bristly hemp, stiff with age and moisture. He lowers the heavy bronze bucket. The sound of the bucket hitting the deep water is a slow, resonant thunker sound that always reminds him how far below the city the life-giving stream of the Qanot flows. Drawing the water is a heavy physical effort. Mansour's arms strain against the rope as friction and the dead weight of the full bucket. A small, unexpected observation. Despite being the intellectual elite, these students must still engage in demanding physical labor multiple times a day. Book learning does not exempt one from the laws of physics. He fills his ewer. The water is startlingly cold, clear, and carries a faint, mineral taste of the deep earth. He moves to the washing station, a low stone bench near the well. This is where the morning purification rituals take place. Other students and a few older mullahs are already there, engaged in the wudutha ritual, washing before prayer. The process is meticulous, washing the hands, rinsing the mouth and nose, a challenging act with such cold water, washing the face, and then the forearms up to the elbows. The water runs down the stone, disappearing into a drain that leads, inevitably, out into the common street channels. Mansour observes an older teacher, Sheikh Karim, performing the ablutions with an almost painful attention to detail. Sheikh Karim has a long white beard and wears immaculate, expensive wool robes. The subtle contradiction. The sheikh insists on the utmost spiritual purity in his washing, yet he does so while surrounded by the sounds and sights of human sloppiness. The constant dripping, the spluttering of water, the mud carried in on the soles of feet. This is a widely accepted historical fact. The practice of wudu not only fulfills a religious obligation, but also provided a necessary. Mansour finishes his washing. His face feels numb from the cold water, but wonderfully clean. He then performs the Salat prayer right there in the courtyard, facing the Qibla Mecca. The movement is simple: standing, bowing, kneeling. The repetitive slow motion of the prayer is a sharp contrast to the chaotic speed of the adjacent bazaar. A quiet joke about the routine. For Mansour, this prayer is less about a mystical journey and more about a momentary, sanctioned break from the relentless pressure of memorization and calligraphy, a time when his mind can rest while his body performs a well-known drill. As he stands up, he notices a small, brightly colored feather resting near the washing stone, the tail feather of a bird. Perhaps a peacock, brought in from the royal menagerie, or from India. A sensory microhook. The unexpected flash of exotic color against the dull, functional stone is a sudden reminder of the vast, luxurious world that finances this austere place of study. The unresolved question historians still debate: how much of the water from the Qanat system was genuinely clean and safe to drink, and how quickly did it become contaminated as it passed through the city? Given the high incidence of waterborne disease described in travelers' accounts, was the impressive engineering of the Qanat ultimately defeated by the lack of proper sewage management? Mansour carefully dries his hands on a small piece of clean, fine linen he carries inside his robe. The fabric is soft and absorbent. He knows his water privilege is precious. Outside the madrasa, the water is not only dirtier, but fiercely expensive. He hears the voice of Sheikh Karim addressing another student, correcting his recitation of a line from a legal text. The voice is low and firm, focused entirely on the precision of ancient law. Mansour avoids eye contact, respecting the silence required. He turns to head back to his hujra, energized by the cold water and the brief moment of communal ritual. The quiet returns, broken only by the echo of his footsteps on the smooth stone. The spice market's slow start. Yunus leaves the cold austerity of the madrasa area and plunges back into the sheer sensory overload of the market. The air immediately changes. The scent of dry ink and stone is obliterated by a complex, intense wave of exotic perfumes, pungent spices, and the heavy sweetness of dried fruits. He is heading for the main spice lane, a narrow, dark alley where the colors explode. Pyramids of saffron, rust red, paprika, pale gingerroot, and glossy black peppercorns sit in wide, shallow baskets. The spice vendors, mostly older men, sit cross-legged behind their wares, seemingly immune to the powerful, combined aromas. A sensory microhook. The air is so thick with scent here that breathing feels like tasting. Yunus's goal is to find the Persian embroidery house, and they are always situated near the spices, because their most expensive work often requires color-fast dyes and costly imported ingredients for more. He spots the merchant he seeks, a heavy-set man named Nasir, whose clothing is immaculate, contrasting sharply with the mess of his own stall. Nasir sells saffron, the most valuable spice in the world, and the bright, almost vulgar red of the threads spills from his open chests. This is a widely accepted historical fact. Samarkand was a pivotal hub for the distribution of spices, particularly those from India and the Far East. Due to the Timurid control over key segments of the Silk Road, the taxes levied on these high-value, low-volume goods were a major source of imperial wealth. Yunus approaches Nasir cautiously. He knows the merchant is notoriously difficult. He waits until Nasir finishes weighing a tiny, almost invisible pinch of saffron for a customer. Nasir uses miniature brass scales that are exquisitely balanced, a beautiful piece of engineering dedicated to measuring something so fleeting and light. Nasir looks up, his eyes sharp and assessing. Yunus presents his bundle of deep blue silk threads. Nasir does not touch the threads immediately. He first picks up a pinch of the threads, bringing them close to his nose. The subtle contradiction. He is judging the visual quality of the dye by its smell, knowing that impurities often manifest in an off-putting odor. The blue is deep, Nasir states, his voice oily and slow, but the weight is light. Where is the density, Yunus? Are you selling me thread or air? Yunus launches into his prepared speech, emphasizing the purity of the indigo and the care with which the silk was prepared. He avoids any mention of the thread's slight lack of uniformity, a quiet joke about absurdity. The entire negotiation is an elaborate performance where both parties are fully aware that the thread is exactly what it is, neither perfect nor entirely worthless yet. They must pretend otherwise for the sake of commerce. A nearby vendor sells dried peppers. The man sneezes suddenly and violently, sending a small cloud of red paprika dust into the air. Yunus quickly shields his threads from the spicy attack. The unresolved question historians still debate. To what extent did the constant warfare and political instability under the later Timurid princes, who were often fighting for succession, affect the reliability of the spice trade and the price stability in Did merchants price their goods based on global demand, or simply based on the latest political rumor? Nasir finally takes the threads, running the cool silk between his thumb and forefinger. He notes the texture. He offers a price that is insulting a few pool more than copper value. Yunus refuses, with a show of deep but polite offense. The negotiation continues, moving not through words, but through subtle shifts in body language. Yunus takes one small step back. Nasir responds by leaning slightly forward, indicating he is willing to raise the price only minimally. A lesser-known detail. Successful spice merchants like Nasir often employed younger boys to sit beneath their stalls, constantly fanning the air to prevent insects from settling on the exposed goods, and perhaps more importantly, to disperse any localized odors that might give away the age or quality of the spices. As Yunus argues his case, a high-ranking official, accompanied by 2 armed guards, walks slowly through the spice alley. The official wears a gold-embroidered coat and a magnificent turban. The guards move the crowd aside with unnecessary force. All conversation ceases instantly. Everyone bows their head slightly. The microhook of power, the sudden, paralyzing silence of a bustling bazaar as an elite figure passes through, is a far more powerful sound than any market noise. The official passes Nasir's stall, briefly glancing at the saffron, but does not stop. As soon as the official is out of earshot, the noise resumes, loud and fast, as if nothing happened. Nasir, sensing Yunus's heightened anxiety, exploits the tension. "You are anxious to leave, Yunus. My final price." He names a number that is barely acceptable. Yunus sighs, calculating the threadbare profit. He nods curtly. The sale is made, sealed with a quick handshake. The money is paid in heavy silver Tonga coins, which Yunus immediately secretes away. The weight of the coins is a solid, comforting reality after the ethereal world of negotiation. The city gates open. Having secured his modest profit, Yunus now turns his attention toward the massive, intimidating structure of the city walls. He is heading for the Chahara Gate, one of the main arteries where the influx of rural life meets the urban core. The flow of people becomes heavier, more chaotic, a pulsing wave of humanity, livestock, and goods. The gate itself is a monumental archway, reinforced with heavy iron and flanked by tall buttressed towers. It is less a simple opening and more a layered choke point designed for defense and control. A subtle microhook of power. The gates open not just to let people in, but to remind every entrant who holds the ultimate authority in Samarkand. The ground here is severely churned up. The combination of early morning dampness and the constant traffic of donkeys and carts has turned the earth outside the walls into a sticky, grey mud, contrasting sharply with the dry dust inside. At the gate, the stream of entrants is moving slowly. Farmers from the surrounding villages, the Decons, are bringing in their produce, thick bundles of straw, wooden cages holding squawking chickens, and carts laden with freshly cut wood for the city's countless ovens. The process of entry is strictly ritualized. At the archway, a team of armed guards and tax collectors stand ready. The guards, wearing leather breastplates over padded tunics, look bored but alert. They carry long spears and curved sabers. Each farmer must declare their goods. The tax collector, a scrawny man with a severe case of hay fever, assesses the value and demands the BJ, the gate tax. This is a widely accepted historical fact. Taxes collected at the city gates, particularly on food and construction materials, were essential for funding the extravagant architectural projects and the large military establishment of the Timurid Empire. A farmer attempts to smuggle a small sack of fine wheat hidden beneath a load of straw. The guard, with a practiced, casual cruelty, plunges the tip of his spear into the straw. The farmer curses softly in his rough village dialect. The guard smiles, finding the small bag. The entire sack is immediately confiscated as a fine. A quiet joke about authority. The efficiency of the tax system is directly proportional to the guard. His ability to find creative ways to be mean before breakfast. Yunus, watching this display, is grateful he is leaving the gate, not entering it. He is heading toward the outlying kilns to assess the quality of new work. The unresolved question historians still debate. Given the high rate of taxation and confiscation observed by travelers, how did the Timurid administration balance the need for revenue against the risk of driving the rural populace and necessary food suppliers into open revolt, or simply abandoning their fields? Did the fear of the Timurid military outweigh the constant drain on their resources? As Yunus passes through the monumental arch, he feels the sudden drop in temperature and the oppressive weight of the stone above him. The gate is not built for comfort. It is built to last 1,000 years. Outside the walls, the air opens up. The sky seems wider. The smells are cleaner, more earth, less humanity. He sees the sprawling agricultural fields and the channels of the Zarafashan River that feed the city. The river's name means sprayer of gold, and it is the true source of Samarkand's wealth. He walks past a group of PSD Doz, furriers who are stretching heavy sheepskins on wooden frames to dry. The smell of raw animal hide and curing chemicals is overwhelming, sharp and industrial. A sensory contrast microhook. The exquisite, almost perfumed scent of his silk threads now seems completely out of place against this brutal working-class odor. Yunus must walk about half a mile further. He reaches a cluster of kilns. These are massive, dome-shaped earthen structures, constantly smoking. A lesser-known detail, the beautiful turquoise and lapis lazuli tiles that adorn the registran require extremely high sustained heat, often over 10 degrees Celsius, to properly set the glaze. Achieving and maintaining this temperature required enormous amounts of scarce fuel and expert supervision. He finds the kiln master, a man whose face is perpetually stained black with soot and whose hands are cracked and hard as dried clay. Yunus is here to check on a batch of tiles he ordered for a client's mihrab prayer niche. He has to ensure the blue of the tiles matches the deep indigo of his own threads. This is the constant challenge, linking the artisan's small, controlled craft to the giant, messy industrial process. Noon in the Copper Bazaar. Yunus leaves the smoking kilns and heads back toward the city center, following a dry, dusty track that parallels one of the large irrigation canals. The sun is now high, beating down mercilessly. The heat is dry and immediate, making the air shimmer above the dusty road. He reaches the Copper Bazaar Sarfkashana, a labyrinthine area known for its noise and heat. Here, the pervasive sounds of the city voices, donkey carts, bells are all drowned out by the metallic, rhythmic clang of hammers. This is where the city's practical wealth is forged. The bazaar is a series of covered, low-ceilinged stalls, which offer little relief from the intense heat generated by the braziers used for annealing the metal. The air is heavy with the smell of burnt charcoal and the sharp coppery scent of heating brass and bronze. In one stall, a master coppersmith, his skin oiled with sweat and streaked with soot, works a sheet of hot bronze. He is creating a large, intricate water ewer, destined for a rich family's hammam bathhouse. His apprentice, a boy no older than 12, struggles to manage the bellows, his face red from the effort and the intense heat. The apprentice is not simply pumping air. He is engaged in a delicate dance with the heat. If he pumps too fast, the fire flares too high, potentially ruining the metal. Too slow, and the bronze cools before the master can shape it. A subtle microhook. The boy's relentless, monotonous work is the unspoken foundation for the master's celebrated artistry. This is a widely accepted historical fact. Copper and bronze working were highly valued trades in Samarkand, producing everything from massive mosque doors and astrolabes to delicate household goods. The alloy composition often varied, depending on the availability of tin and zinc, making the final color of the metal unpredictable. The master strikes the bronze with a small, rounded hammer. The sound is high-pitched, metallic, and sharp ting, a deafening counterpoint to the deep thud of the heavier hammers shaping rough sheets nearby. The light catches the metal surface, flashing briefly with reflected sunlight that penetrates the dark stall. Yunus watches for a moment, fascinated by the precise force, a quiet joke about the uncomfortable work. The master craftsman, who creates objects of beauty and utility, is simultaneously sacrificing his hearing and his clean lungs to his profession. He wears a simple, dirty cloth wrapped around his head, less for fashion and more to wick away the endless flow of sweat. He steps deeper into the alley, trying to find a stall selling finished brass hinges for a gate he is building for a client. The floor here is littered with scraps of metal and flakes of charcoal, making every step treacherous. The unresolved question historians still debate: how much of the copper and bronze used in Samarkand was mined locally from the adjacent mountains, and how much was sourced through the vast Timurid campaigns, potentially smelting down captured religious icons or weapons from conquered lands. The source of the raw material remains a complex puzzle linking industry directly to warfare. He finds the hinge seller, a man sitting patiently amidst stacks of finished goods. The hinges are heavy, cast brass, slightly uneven but strong. Yunus tests one by opening and closing the hinge, feeling the resistance and listening for the grating sound of poorly cut metal. He begins the negotiation. The price is quoted in silver tanga, but the seller suggests payment in copper fullers, small, low-value copper coins, which is a common practice for minor transactions. A lesser-known detail: the copper coinage of the Timurid era was notoriously unstable. Often, small traders would weigh the copper coins instead of counting them, as their metallic value sometimes surpassed their face value due to debasement. Yunus insists on paying with the silver tanga he earned earlier, calculating the copper exchange rate carefully to avoid being cheated by weight. This negotiation is tedious, involving small calculations made in the dust with a stick, figures that are instantly erased by a passing foot. As he finally settles on a price, a young apprentice carrying a newly formed, still warm copper pot bumps into him. A sensory microhook, the unexpected brief touch of the warm metal, is a sudden, physical connection to the fierce heat of the forge, a stark reminder of the energy that permeates this bazaar. Yunus secures the heavy brass hinges in his bag. The weight of the metal feels grounding and reliable, a solid contrast to the fluctuating prices of silk and spices. He steps out of the dark, noisy alley, blinking against the brutal glare of the noon sun. He is now ready to find food, having fully traded the delicate world of fabric for the brute force of metal. The public bathhouse rituals. It is now past noon, and the heat of the Samarkand sun, combined with the dry intensity of the copper bazaar, has left Yunus feeling gritty and exhausted. The accumulation of dye dust, street dirt, and sweat is inescapable. His next necessary destination is the hammam, the public bathhouse. The bathhouse, though a place of ritual cleansing, does not announce itself with a fresh scent. Its entrance is heavy, low, and smells faintly of sulfur and hot, damp stone. It is a necessary public service, built on Waqf, religious endowment land. and it represents a few hours of subsidized luxury for the common man. Yunus pays his small fee at the low counter, receiving a thin, coarse piece of linen and a pair of worn wooden clogs. The subtle contradiction: you pay money for cleanliness, but the cloth you receive is itself often questionable, making the entire exercise slightly absurd. He descends into the main chamber. The air immediately shifts, becoming thick, heavy, and hot. It is a humid, suffocating heat, dramatically different from the dry heat outside. The sound of the market is replaced by the echoing splash of water and the low murmur of voices amplified by the stone dome. The main room is cavernous, vaulted, and dimly lit by small, star-shaped apertures in the dome, which filter the sunlight into dusty, luminous shafts. The floor is made of smooth, warm stone, and steam rises constantly from the central water basin. Yunus strips down to his linen loincloth and walks further in. He passes through several rooms, each successively hotter, designed to relax the muscles and draw out the grime. The heat in the final chamber is intense, causing the sweat to burst immediately from his pores. This is a widely accepted historical fact. Bathhouses were not merely for hygiene, but were crucial social institutions in Timurid. Cities serving as meeting places for gossip, business deals, and even political discussions due to the temporary equality afforded by nakedness. He lies down on the warm, dry stone bench. The heat is heavy, pressing down on him. He feels the tension slowly seep out of his tired muscles. He watches the moss-bedge bath attendant, a large man with enormous hands, working on another patron, kneading his back with practiced brutality. Yunus then begins his own cleansing ritual. He uses a rough, abrasive pumice stone, scrubbing the dirt and dead skin from his arms and legs. This scraping is painful but necessary, a satisfying removal of the day's physical history. A quiet joke about the routine: the common man in Samarkand spends his life accumulating grit, and then spends his meager earnings to scrape it all off, only to repeat the cycle tomorrow. He requests a small bucket of water. He pours the hot, steaming water over his head. The heat on his scalp is immediate and intense. The sensation of the hot water running down his dusty body is a moment of pure, temporary bliss. The unresolved question historians still debate: how effective were the strict regulations and sanitary codes that were purportedly in place to ensure the bathhouses were kept clean and the water was changed frequently? Given the sheer volume of patrons and the lack of running fresh water in many areas, how quickly did the warm water become a source of rather than a cure for illness? He notices a wealthy merchant, whom he recognizes from the spice bazaar, engaged in a conversation with a religious scholar near the central basin. They are completely naked, discussing a sensitive financial arrangement involving a large investment in a new caravan, a sensory microhook of social leveling. The profound equalizing heat of the hammam temporarily strips away the social hierarchy maintained by layers of expensive silk and strict etiquette. As he prepares to leave the hottest room, he overhears a piece of gossip. The price of imported paper from China has spiked drastically due to recent troubles on the eastern border. This small detail, utterly separate from his immediate physical concerns, is the kind of critical market intelligence that spreads through the bathhouse network. Yunus rinses off the last of the super rough bar of alkaline vegetable ash. He feels light, almost buoyant. He moves back to the cooling room, where he wraps the coarse linen around himself. The air here is merely warm, a gentle transition back to the outside world. A lesser-known detail: it was customary upon leaving the bath to drink a small cup of sweetened sherbet, offered by the bath attendant. This was thought to rebalance the humors after the intense sweating. Yunus accepts his cup. The cold, sweet liquid is a sharp, welcome contrast to the internal heat he still retains. He finally steps back out into the sun-drenched, dust-filled street. He is physically clean, but the heat outside immediately begins its work to undo the entire luxurious ritual. He feels briefly purified, ready to face the afternoon's labor with a temporary, clean clarity. Luncheon the street cook's art, refreshed but instantly drying out. Yunus seeks sustenance. He leaves the main bazaar, knowing that the best and most honest food is found in the peripheral food stalls where the common laborers congregate. He follows the irresistible, heavy scent of rendered fat, spice, and boiling meat, the primal perfume of pulao. He arrives at a small open-air kitchen set up in a dusty side street, near a busy carpenter's workshop. The kitchen is dominated by a single, colossal kazana, heavy hemisphere-shaped iron cauldron, resting precariously over a roaring fire fed by wood scraps. The heat radiating from this cauldron is fierce, contributing significantly to the already high midday temperature. The cook, a huge, cheerful man named Iskander, works with practiced grace. He is surrounded by massive trays of chopped carrots, onions, and heaps of raw bone-in mutton. His cleaver slices through the meat with a sharp, rhythmic thwack-thwack. Yunus joins a small cluster of workers, a stonemason, a porter, and a leather worker who wait patiently for the food to be ready. The sheer, overwhelming smell of the pulao preparation makes his mouth water. This is a widely accepted historical fact. Pulao, a dish of rice, carrots, onions, and meat cooked in a single pot of fat, often sheep's tail fat, or dumba, was the staple celebration and communal food across the Timurid world, often served from the kazan directly to groups of diners. Iskander begins the crucial stage, adding the rice. The grains, long, pearly white rice from the river valleys, are soaked and then carefully layered over the meat and vegetables, separated by the boiling, shimmering fat. Iskander then pours a precise amount of hot water over the mixture, enough to just cover the rice. He closes the cauldron with a heavy, round wooden lid, effectively creating a giant, pressurized cooker. The sound changes dramatically. The sizzling and popping of the initial frying fades into the deep, gurgling boil of the rice, absorbing the liquid and the fat. A sensory micro-hook. The shift from aggressive sizzle to quiet gurgle is the cook's signal that the magic is happening. A quiet joke about the absurdity of appetite. The men stand around Iskander's cauldron in the intense heat, voluntarily adding to their discomfort, all because the smell of boiling fat promises the most satisfying meal of the day. After what feels like an eternity of waiting, Iskander removes the lid. A gigantic cloud of steam, fragrant with cumin, coriander, and mutton, billows into the air. He plunges a long wooden paddle deep into the kazan and begins to gently mix the layers, fluffing the rice so that every grain is perfectly coated in the golden fat and the juices of the meat. The unresolved question historians still debate, given the incredibly rich, fat-heavy nature of the typical pulao and other common dishes. How frequently did the average laborer consume this type of meal? Was this daily fare, or was it a treat reserved only for the midday meal after a particularly heavy morning of labor, balanced out by simple bread and yogurts the rest of the day? The meal is ready. Iskander does not serve plates. He scoops a monumental mound of pulao onto a shared, low brass platter set on a small stool. The men gather around. Eating is a communal, intimate act. They do not use spoons or forks, but simply use their right hand, scooping the warm, sticky rice and meat into small balls. Yunus takes his share. The taste is a complex blast of flavor, the earthy sweetness of the carrots, the sharp burst of the cumin, and the strong, distinctive flavor of the mutton fat. The rice grains are separate and firm, not mushy. A lesser-known detail, it was customary in this culture and a sign of good manners for a diner to first scrape the fat and oil from the rim of the platter back into the center using his thumb, ensuring the shared meal remained visually appealing and collectively moist. He observes the stonemason across from him, whose hands are permanently stained with white dust and whose fingers are rough and swollen. The stonemason eats with loud, satisfied grunts, a sensory contrast microhook. The elegant, expensive spices that passed through the hands of Nasir in the bazaar, destined for royal kitchens, are now being consumed with crude, joyous noise by the city's working foundation, all sitting on the dusty ground. Yunus finishes his portion quickly, wiping his greasy hand on a piece of leftover naan. The deep satisfaction of the heavy, hot food settles in his stomach. quickly followed by the inevitable post-meal drowsiness. He pays Iskander his few pool and copper coins, the taste of the warm spices lingering on his tongue. He knows he must fight the urge to sleep if he wants to complete the afternoon's work. An astronomer's burden fighting the drowsy weight of the pulau, Yunus makes his way out of the working-class periphery and toward the highest ground in Samarkand, the location of the Ula Beg Observatory. This is not a casual stop. The observatory is a deliberate counterpoint to the city's commerce, a temple dedicated to pure, unadulterated knowledge. The observatory complex is situated slightly outside the main citadel walls, built on a prominent hill to offer an unobstructed view of the horizon and the celestial sphere. As Yunus climbs the dry, winding path, the noise of the city fades, replaced by a quiet, persistent wind that whistles over the exposed stone. The air here feels thinner, cleaner, and oddly sterile. He arrives at the colossal, circular structure. It is currently under construction, but the core instruments are operational. He is here not as a customer, but as a supplier. He sometimes provides specially dyed silk threads for the covering of delicate instruments. He enters the main, sunken trench of the primary instrument, the Fakri sextant. This is a widely accepted historical fact. This sextant, built into the earth, was the largest astronomical instrument of its time, designed to precisely measure the altitude of celestial bodies. Its radius was a staggering 40 meters, allowing for unprecedented accuracy in observing the sun and moon. The sheer scale is overwhelming. Yunus walks along the massive carved marble arc that descends deep into the earth. The surface of the arc is meticulously polished, etched with incredibly fine, almost invisible markings that represent degrees and minutes of celestial arc. He sees an astronomer, a man in his late 50s named Jamshid, hunched over the sextant. Jamshid is peering through a narrow viewing slit, making careful readings. He holds a piece of smoky glass to protect his eyes from the afternoon sun. He is completely motionless, a picture of profound concentration. Jamshid is accompanied by a young scribe who sits nearby with an inkwell and a stack of expensive paper, diligently recording the numbers spoken by the astronomer. The language used is Persian, rich with technical terms derived from ancient Greek and Arabic. A quiet joke about the scientific burden. These men spend their entire lives looking at objects millions of miles away, while simultaneously ignoring the dust that is perpetually collecting on their shoes. Jamshid finally speaks, his voice a low, precise murmur that echoes slightly in the stone trench. Altitude of the star or 3 degrees, 42 minutes, 56 seconds. The scribe writes it down, his reed pen scratching softly. Yunus waits quietly, not wanting to disturb the delicate process of measurement. He feels intensely aware of his own rough, work-worn clothes and his low, practical concerns, contrasted with the astronomer's lofty, intellectual pursuit. The unresolved question historians still debate. To what extent was Ula Bega's primary goal in compiling his famous Zeji Sultani star catalogue scientific accuracy, and to what extent was it a political project? Did the immense investment in the observatory function primarily as propaganda, validating the Timurid dynasty as divinely sanctioned and intellectually superior to its rivals? The air here is cold despite the sun, a result of the massive stone walls and the depth of the sextant trench. Yunus finally clears his throat softly. Jamshid looks up, his eyes momentarily unfocused, still adjusting from the intense scrutiny of the sun. Yunus presents his sample of thread. He explains that it is dyed to the exact, deep indigo required to create a backdrop for the gold thread constellations that will decorate a massive celestial globe. Jamshid examines the thread with the same exacting precision he uses for stars. A lesser-known detail, astronomical instruments, such as the astrolabe and globes, required the utmost precision, and the threads used for marking coordinates and boundaries on these tools had to be perfectly consistent in thickness and color to prevent parallax error in measurements or distortion of the final product. He nods, satisfied with the dye's darkness and the thread's uniformity. The transaction is brief, involving a promise of payment in 2 days. As Yunus turns to leave, Jamshid calls out, not to him, but to his scribe. Make a note, the azimuth of the wind has shifted 5 degrees north since noon. A dust storm approaches. A sensory microhook. The ultimate use of this sophisticated scientific apparatus is often to predict the most basic, inescapable reality of the desert climate. Yunus feels the slight increase in the wind's intensity. He realizes that the precision of the observatory is not just an academic exercise. It has a practical, powerful ability to read the world. He descends the hill, now moving with a renewed urgency, knowing he must complete his work before the predicted storm descends upon the dusty city. The domestic sphere and weeping willow. Yunus, his mind now focused on the approaching dust storm and the need to secure his premises, walks toward the wealthier residential quarter, where the homes are larger, built around enclosed, high-walled courtyards. The streets here are quieter, cleaner, and often shaded by mature trees. He stops outside the formidable nail-studded wooden gate of the merchant whose gate he is helping to build. The gate itself is taller than a man on horseback, designed less for welcome and more for imposing privacy and security. He waits by the small, discreet side entrance used by servants. Inside this home, in the central courtyard, the women's world unfolds. The courtyard is a sanctuary. It contains a small geometric garden and, crucially, a mature weeping willow majnuntal, its branches providing a soft, shifting shadow against the harsh afternoon sun. Here sits the merchant's wife, Bia, attended by several female slaves. She is engaged in the meticulous high-status work of embroidery. She works on a large piece of heavy silk velvet, stretching the fabric taut over a wooden frame. Her needlework is not simple. She is using gold and silver thread, creating dense floral patterns that seem to rise three-dimensionally from the fabric. This is a widely accepted historical fact. In wealthy Timurid households, the inner courtyard and the domestic quarters were strictly segregated spaces for women. Andon or harem, where their social status and family honor were reflected through their skills in textile work. Managing the household and supervising the female slaves. BRS garments are made of fine, imported silk, dyed with expensive cochineal red. She smells faintly of rosewater and dried jasmine. The subtle contradiction, though confined within these walls, she is manipulating materials and wealth that come from across the known world, making her technically immobile, yet globally connected. One of the younger slaves is grinding dried roots and herbs with a mortar and pestle, preparing a tonic. The rhythmic thump-thump of the pestle is the soft background rhythm of the domestic afternoon. The smell is sharp, herbal, and medicinal, contrasting with the floral perfumes. BR speaks in a low, measured voice, instructing one of her older slaves and the management of the food stores, the precise count of sacks of wheat, jars of preserved lemons, and barrels of oil. Managing the household inventory in a large home was a complex administrative task, essentially running a small, self-contained economy. A quiet joke about the domestic routine. For all the great wealth and sophistication, the afternoon is often defined by the profound, structured boredom of waiting for the evening, broken only by the necessity of accounting for every last piece of dried mutton. BR lifts her hand, pausing her embroidery. The gold thread catches the light, flashing brilliantly. She gestures toward a servant with a bowl of sweet, thickened yogurt. She eats slowly, savoring the cool, slightly tart taste. Yunus, still waiting outside, hears the faint, muffled sounds of the household, the laughter of children playing in a distant room, the clanging of a bucket inside. The high walls make the outside world feel incredibly distant and muted. The unresolved question historians still debate: to what extent did high-ranking Timurid women exercise genuine political and economic power? We know they controlled huge endowments, waqt, and managed personal wealth. But how much was this power truly autonomous, and how much was simply an extension of their husband's or father's influence? The old willow tree begins to rustle, a louder, more insistent sound now. The wind predicted by the astronomer Jamshid is definitely arriving. The sun, previously harsh, now appears hazy through a thin veil of airborne particles. Yunus is finally let in by a watchful male servant, but is confined to the receiving antechamber. Not permitted to enter the main courtyard, he delivers the brass hinges, receives his final payment in heavy silver tangomore than he earned all morning, and is ushered out quickly. A lesser-known detail: direct, prolonged visual contact between men like Yunus and women like BR was strictly prohibited, symbolizing the profound separation of the public and private spheres. As he leaves, he hears BR's voice, now slightly raised, giving an order about securing the windows against the wind. Her authority is absolute within these walls. Yunus steps back out into the rapidly intensifying wind, carrying the weight of the silver coins, the tangible reward for his necessary exclusion from the comfortable, perfumed world he just glimpsed. The dust begins to sting his eyes. Shadows lengthen. The call to prayer, the air in the marketplace, has grown thick and gritty, carrying the first serious signs of the looming dust storm. The sun, previously a brilliant disk, is now a dull, hazy orb, its light filtered into an eerie, yellowish-brown cast. The long, stretching shadows of the afternoon are unusually blurred, lacking the sharp definition of midday. The commercial rhythm of the city begins its deliberate, slow retreat. This is the time for the ASR prayer, the mid-afternoon call which acts as the major cultural pause between the intense labor of noon and the final push before nightfall. Yunus, having secured his payments, sits on a low stone ledge near the cloth market, resting. He feels the fine dust settling on his collar and in his hair. He watches the subtle, universal shift in the merchant's demeanor. The loud, aggressive haggling gives way to a kind of quiet, patient watchfulness. Then, the sound comes, not a sudden bell or a drum, but the human voice, amplified only by the structure of the minarets and the still, dusty air. The muezzin begins his call to prayer, the adhan, from the top of the Ula Beg Madrasa minaret. The sound is long, drawn out, and deeply resonant. Allahu Akbar, ... The call is not rushed. It is a slow, powerful pronouncement that commands immediate attention. A subtle microhook of shared experience. Even merchants who might be skeptical of religious piety still find themselves stopping because the sound is too pervasive, too deeply woven into the city's structure to ignore. In the bazaar, the activity does not stop instantly, but it slows dramatically. A trader quickly covers his baskets of almonds. A coppersmith drops his hammer onto his anvil, creating a dull final thud. The flow of traffic halts, creating a momentary, awkward cluster of carts and pedestrians. Yunus rises, finds a clean patch of earth, and unrolls a small, thin prayer rug he carries. He faces the direction of Mecca. Other men join him, forming small, impromptu rows in the dusty square, ignoring the surrounding chaos of the market. This is a widely accepted historical fact. The 5 daily prayers, particularly the communal afternoon and evening prayers, were rigidly enforced in Timurid Samarkand, often serving as a visible affirmation of the state's religious authority. The communal prayer is a brief, structured escape. The men move together, bowing and kneeling in unison, their voices silent, save for the low murmur of the imam leading the prayer. The slow, repetitive movements are a calming balm against the nervous energy generated by the market and the impending storm. A quiet joke about the social pause. For 5 minutes, the tax collectors, the wealthy spice merchants, and the struggling cotton traders kneel shoulder to shoulder, pretending that their earthly debts and ambitions do not exist. As the prayer concludes, the world instantly rushes back. The moment of spiritual unity vanishes, replaced by the immediate need for profit. The copper merchant snatches up his hammer. The trader uncovers his almonds. The wheels of a waiting cart begin to turn again. The unresolved question historians still debate, given the vast non-Muslim populations brought into Samarkand, has captured artisans and slaves. To what extent did they integrate into or resist the dominant Islamic social rhythm of the city? Did they simply stop work during the call to prayer out of convenience? Or was this moment of religious observance genuinely disruptive and potentially oppressive to the city's diverse non-Muslim workforce? Yunus quickly folds his rug. He notices that the sky now has a distinct orange hue, typical of dust from the Kizilkum Desert being swept into the atmosphere. The wind is picking up, whipping at the canvas awnings over the stalls. He decides to go home early, bypassing his final errand. The risk of being caught in the full force of a desert storm is too great. A lesser-known detail: desert dust storms were a common and severe threat, not just for discomfort, but because the fine, abrasive sand could contaminate food, damage silk, and severely harm livestock, often leading to mass closures of the bazaar. He sees a group of caravan guards beginning to actively round up their camels and secure their massive bales of goods near the main register. They are moving with a frantic, focused energy. The silent warning from the astronomer on the hill now translates into tangible action in the marketplace. The city is preparing for a temporary siege by the elements. The caravan readies to depart. The dust storm is no longer a prediction. It is a visible, tactile reality. The visibility is dropping quickly, and the wind howls through the narrow streets, whipping fine sand into stinging horizontal sheets. Yunus hurries to the massive caravanserai near the western gate, where the long-distance merchants are making their final, frantic preparations. The courtyard of the caravanserai, normally a scene of orderly chaos, is now pure pandemonium. Merchants are shouting, slaves are running, and the heavy lead. Bactrian camels, the two-humped workhorses of the Silk Road, are bellowing their profound dissatisfaction with the weather. The massive animals are being loaded with the last of their cargo: bales of precious Chinese silk, chests of Timurid armor, and heavy sacks of dried fruits and nuts. The loading process is a brutal, hurried art. Each bale must be tied with thick rope and balanced precisely across the camel's twin humps. An uneven load could lame the animal, or worse, cause the entire train to tip over in the desert. A subtle microhook of discomfort. The coarse bristly hair of the Bactrian camel is everywhere on the ground, clinging to the wool robes, and now being blown into Yunus's face by the wind. Yunus is here to confirm the departure time with a merchant who owes him a small, final payment for some dyed rope that will secure a particularly valuable shipment of paper. He struggles to keep his heavy woolen hood over his face, trying to filter the stinging dust. This is a widely accepted historical fact. Major long-distance caravans typically prefer to travel during the cooler hours of the night, necessitating a highly chaotic, late-afternoon preparation ritual regardless of the weather. These caravans often contained hundreds of camels and required a military-sized escort of guards. He finds the merchant, a grim-faced man from Khorasan, supervising his slaves. The man is clearly furious about the storm, which threatens to delay his departure and throw his meticulous timeline into disarray. Yunus tries to approach, but is intercepted by a caravan guarder, veteran soldier carrying a long, curved scimitar and a large round shield made of hardened leather. The guard's face is weathered, and he looks deeply annoyed. A quiet joke about authority. The guard's sole priority is the safety of the cargo, and he views any civilian, especially a man with silk thread, as a potential distraction or liability. Yunus manages to explain his minor business. The Khwarezmi merchant, without looking at him, tosses a small pouch containing the last silver tanga onto the ground. The coins land with a dull thud in the sand. Yunus scrambles to retrieve them, realizing he has just been paid and dismissed simultaneously. The unresolved question historians still debate. Given the enormous financial risks involved in long-distance travel ranging from bandits and political upheaval to catastrophic weather, how was the risk distributed across the caravan? Did individual merchants bear all the liability? Or did the Timurid state offer a form of centralized insurance or banking guarantee for the massive taxes they levied? He watches as the merchant's slaves apply thick protective cloths over the most valuable cargo, securing them with Yunus's dyed rope. The blue color of the rope, which he took such care to achieve, now looks dull and insignificant against the swirling, monochromatic background of the dust. The most intense activity is at the feeding troughs. The camels are being given their final, massive ration of dried dates and tough hay. The sound of the camels chewing a loud, wet, grinding noise adds a strangely domestic rhythm to the surrounding frenzy. Yunus sees the caravan leader, the Karwanbashi, consulting a small, rolled-up chart. The Karwanbashi is the authority figure, responsible for the navigation, security, and welfare of the entire train. He wears heavier armor than the guards and carries a determined, almost fatalistic expression, a lesser-known detail. Before a major departure, it was customary for the Karwanbashi to consult an astrologer to ensure the timing of the journey was auspicious. Even in this practical high-stakes enterprise, celestial observation played a role, linking the work of the astronomer on the hill to the immediate concerns of the merchant on the plain. The Karwanbashi shouts an order. The main gate of the caravanserai begins to creak open slowly, groaning against the wind. The order is given. They will depart into the storm. It is a decision driven not by comfort, but by the relentless dictates of the market and the desire to stay on schedule. Yunus quickly exits the complex, turning his back on the dust-choked chaos. He carries the final payment, the weight of the silver reassuring in his palm. The sight of the huge caravan lumbering out into the yellow dust, disappearing almost immediately, is a powerful visual reminder of the precarious, vast world that Samarkand serves. Yunus arrives back at his small house in the weaver's quarter. The wind is now screaming, a high-pitched sound that seems to press against the clay walls. He quickly secures the heavy wooden door with a thick bolt and pushes a heavy sack of old textiles against the bottom. Crack, to prevent the fine, choking dust from infiltrating the small dwelling. Inside, the light is dim and filtered, a dusty twilight. Fatima has already placed the last remaining embers of the fire inside a thick metal brazier and covered it with a heavy lid to prevent sparks, the greatest fear of any timber-framed city. The air, though thick with dust, is at least still and warm. The family settles quickly. They eat the remnants of the morning naan and some cold yogurt. Their movements are subdued, their voices low, respecting the quiet of the night and the anxiety brought by the storm. A small, unexpected observation. The deep silence within the tightly sealed home feels heavier and more oppressive than the noise of the day. A silence pregnant with the sounds they are actively excluding. After the final Isha night prayer is said, a brief, low murmur in the dark, the entire city slides into a deep, anxious sleep. The only sound within the house is the heavy, rhythmic breathing of Yunus and Fatima, and the persistent, irritating whine of the wind outside. The real atmosphere of the deep night, however, is defined by the one person who is awake. The Shabguard, the night watchman. The watchman, an older man named Karim, moves slowly along the main avenues, his pace deliberately slow and methodical. He carries a heavy, spiked wooden club and a flickering, open-flame oil lantern. The light from the lantern is feeble, casting huge, wildly shifting shadows on the walls, shadows that seem far more menacing than the watchman himself. The smells of the night are distinct. They are not the smells of industry or food, but the cold, heavy smell of wet stone, earth, and wood smoke that has settled deep into the city's structure. This is a widely accepted historical fact. The night watch, usually organized by neighborhood guilds or local authorities, was essential for urban security, primarily guarding against fire and burglary, but also enforcing the curfew that restricted movement after the final prayer. Karim's function is announced by the sound of his club striking the cobblestones. Every few minutes, he delivers a deep, resonant thud-thud against the pavement. This sound, the watchman's knock, is meant to reassure those inside, a sonic declaration that order is still present, albeit tenuous. A quiet joke about absurdity. The watchman must make noise to prove that the silence is safe. Yunus hears the distant thud through the thick clay walls. The sound is muffled, but it enters his consciousness, becoming an anchor in the darkness. The unresolved question historians still debate: to what degree did the night watch actually deter criminals? And to what extent were they complicit in, or simply paid off by larger, organized groups of thieves? Was the watchman's knock a genuine sign of security, or simply a warning to the quiet, organized criminal elements that the authorities were passing by? Karim stops near a public cistern. He leans against the cold stone, shielding his lantern flame from the wind. He listens. The sounds of the night are deceptive. The scuttling of rats, the distant barking of a dog, and the constant high-pitched screech of the wind through the eaves. He scans the silent doors. Every single window is a black, opaque square, giving no hint of the life within. A lesser-known detail: the watchman carried a simple, folded horn or whistle, which he would only use in the event of a catastrophic fire or an invasion. The sound of this horn was the single greatest terror for the sleeping city, signifying total disaster. Karim continues his slow walk, the dust stinging his eyes even at this late hour. He passes the grand, silent archways of the empty bazaar. He thinks about his own small pimenta few copper pool and the immense responsibility of standing between the sleeping city and the twin threats of human evil and the chaotic, impersonal threat of fire. Yunus, drifting towards sleep, hears the watchman's knock recede into the distance. The final thought that passes through his mind is the profound fragility of his life, a life built on unpredictable harvests, unstable coins, and walls that, though thick, are ultimately just dried earth. The entire glorious structure of Samarkand tiles, the gold, the silk, the science rests on the simple ability of men like him to wake up and work again tomorrow. The wind outside softens now, turning into a long, low sigh, an exhaust of the desert's anger. The dust begins its slow, vertical descent, settling like a heavy velvet cloth over the domes and the sleeping streets. Listen to the lingering silence. The night watchman has passed, and his steps are now only a memory absorbed by the thick walls of the city. There are no more urgent voices, no clang of the hammer, no insistent shout of the water seller. There is only the deep, rhythmic breath of a massive city at rest, a metropolis exhausted by its own grandeur and its own constant, complex striving. Feel the soft, dry air against your skin, knowing that tomorrow the sun will rise again over the great tiled arches, and the dust will once again begin its necessary, eternal dance. The world of silks, spices, knowledge, and stone is secure for this one dark moment. Allow yourself to sink deeper into the quiet, heavy comfort of this ancient sleep. There is only the subtle, rhythmic ebb and flow of your own breath, a gentle anchor in the darkness. You are simply drifting, held safe between the rise and fall of the grand, old world. Let the gentle weight of the past carry you effortlessly toward your own restful slumber.